Hey everybody, Phantom139 here, and welcome back to part 2 of my update series. This part is going to be focused on the Lightfall expansion and the new features and updates to the game that came out as a result of it. Just a few quick notes on this part. I did record this video on Thursday the 9th, so before the raid went live, which I will have feedback for in my next State of Destiny 2 video in June. General thoughts for raids remain the same as always. I am still strongly against contest mode in the game, and I just think the whole day one debacle should end. And also, the other note for today is, unlike many of my other videos, I don't actually have like a script here. I just have like a general list of topics that I plan on hitting. And I don't really have any footage from Lightfall since I haven't done any streaming since the middle of last season. So this is just kind of background gameplay from one of my old streams, and I don't really have any like figures or diagrams to show today. So this is one of those videos that you can kind of just put on in the background, and then if you just want to listen to my thoughts and opinions, you can just kind of have it going in the background. So let's talk about the main points of the video. So I'll dive into the key topics here. So we'll start with the story of Lightfall. And my initial thoughts and impressions on the story is that there were good things about it, and there were also bad things about it. And the end of the expansion really left a lot more questions than it was supposed to answer, in my opinion. Like, we're talking about part one of the end of the Light and Dark saga, and we're still introducing new characters, we're still introducing new plot lines, and this really should have been the time where we start to bring home a lot of these outstanding plot lines, start to really pin in onto the one final main story thread line, which in this case was the Witness and the arrival of the Pyramid Fleet. In terms of the opening, I thought that was really where the stage was set, and I kind of really felt disappointed in where the story went after such a very strong opening cutscene, only to have, you realize that, well, that's really the only one of those opening cutscenes that had that level of action and interaction going on. In terms of the opening story missions, the missions themselves, once again, felt very similar to the Witch Queen style missions where there were multiple checkpoints. I think there was like one or two campaign missions that broke this mold of one or three loot giving checkpoints and only had like one or two. But then again, the Witch Queen campaign also had one or two of those missions as well, so I suppose it all balanced out in the end, so that's probably fine as is. In terms of the story's characters, I'm just going to say right now that I am completely uninterested in anything that in my mind has to do with message pandering or topics that people want to push forward or enlighten. I don't think this kind of stuff has any place in video games. And unfortunately, it really felt like Bungie was trying to check off a list of talking points in the storyline versus actually making a compelling character. I mean, we had the whole like 80s montage thing, and the whole, the old veteran sacrifices himself and we're left with the new guy kind of thing. And I don't really think that that was what you should have done. I think that had the story, focus more in on developing the characters and you spending time getting to work with the new characters, then it would have actually been more enjoyable of an experience versus something that just, at the end of it, I was just wanting it to be over kind of thing. Like the corny lines from year one were back as well, and I thought we had given that up with Forsaken. Like that's one of the reasons why Forsaken was such a well-loved story expansion. It brought back the dark themes to the game. It brought back the intensity, the action, and most importantly, it brought back the seriousness of the game. Whereas this time around, we had the seriousness, we had the threat in place, and then you have these characters, these new characters that come in, and they don't even care about the threat. Like, it doesn't even matter. Like, through the whole tone of everything that was set up from the end of the Witch Queen leading up to the Lightfall expansion. And I just didn't really like that at the end. Also, this whole thing about the veil, and then, we get to the last mission, and then you look at this thing and it's like, that's cool. What is it? So Bungie's already said that they plan on addressing these story questions throughout the year, but I also take a problem with that, because if you're putting the answers to all these story questions in the seasonal stories, well, anyone who jumps into the game later on, they're not going to get these answers. So it's kind of something that I feel like you really jump the gun on. And these kind of questions should have been answered in the actual campaign itself, with the seasonal storylines left to have their general plot threads moving forward. Next up, we have the new Darkness subclass and element in the form of Strand. And I had some mixed impressions about this subclass going into the DLC. Given the fact that as a Warlock main, I've really felt disappointed with the past year of light subclass updates. I really wasn't going in with any kind of good expectations, but I will say I was pleasantly surprised with how actually good the kits do feel. I also know that the Titans had some pretty negative feedback regarding the Strand subclass being similar to Striker and Behemoth, and while those points, in my opinion, still stand, the subclass itself was balanced out very well, especially after the second day where Bungie unlocked all of the fragments to play around with prior to the raid launch tomorrow. The fluidity of movement with Strand feels good, although the only feedback I can really provide is that the base cooldowns themselves are really too high for this subclass. It basically requires you to use the Thread of Generation fragment, and just given how potent that fragment is, it's inevitably going to get nerfed, and when it does, the regeneration is just going to feel bad again. So I'm not really a fan of having very long cooldowns, and this whole direction of putting us back into the 30th pack. I made a video a while back when the 30th pack came out, and the thumbnail had a WTF sandbox team message plastered on the bottom of it, because Destiny is about the space magic. It's about having fun with your abilities, and here we are nerfing the uptime of abilities again and kind of really losing out on that power fantasy side of the game. So I wasn't really a fan of that, and I hope going forward we can move away from this thought of it has to be only gunplay. Like, gunplay is part of the game, but remember, this is a space magic RPG game, so bring the abilities back to the forefront, please, and thank you. Next up, we have to talk about the gear and mod updates, and this is going to be kind of a double-sided coin to me, where some of the changes were very good, and then other changes, not so much. So we'll start with the good stuff, since it kind of feels like I've been pandering criticism for the past 8.5 minutes now. So in terms of the good things, I will say right away, I am very glad to see Affinity gone. Like, that was one of the most problematic parts of the old build crafting system. Like, you really couldn't branch out and make these very specific builds because of the limitations of having to have a specific element on your gear. And in some cases, you were completely locked out from doing these very wacky builds. Thanks to the changes to the Affinity itself, you can actually now mix and match a bunch of different mods together. Also, having mods cost significantly less generally across the board, in my opinion, is a very good change. It allows you to actually slot in many more choices of mods, and this again kind of fits into some good and a little bit of bad when we talk about the mods themselves here shortly. In terms of the mods themselves, the selection of mods, in my opinion, is good. I'm not exactly sure how I feel about changing it from weapon to element specific things. I suppose it could be a good thing if you want to have like more than one piece of the same type, and given the changes to shields, I suppose that's not the end of the world, but it's one of those things where I'm not really sold on it completely yet, but give it some more time, we'll see how it shakes out. On the flip side, however, let's talk about some of the things I'm not really a fan of. We'll start with the obvious, the whole absolute demolishing and nuking of elemental wells, which for the last 2 years was a very fun part of the game, and I really felt like they were only starting to come into prominence during the Witch Queen year, and now they're just no longer existent, and the replacements to them feel completely uninspired and they are just pointless to even use. So that's one of those things that I hope we can get rid of the whole breaches, fire sprites, and go back to what we had before with Wells. It really felt better to have the activation cues on the armor pieces themselves instead of the subclasses where they will be using up your fragments to trigger them. Also, the mod system, it feels very diluted compared to before. Like in the old system, you had some very specific high-powered mods that they did cost more, but they were very fun to use. And we lost a lot of those mods with the transition here, and nothing really has stood up to take its place. Also, the potency of many of the old mod builds that used a combination of Charge with Light and, for instance, refreshing cooldowns are no longer there, and they have been replaced with these Kickstart mods, which unfortunately, again, have nowhere near as much potency as their old counterparts. So it's an example of we have something similar, but it is so much worse than it was before, and the end result is something that is not fun to engage with. I know Bungie has already said that this new system will allow them to build on what the mods have now, but this is really something that I feel like was an oversight on their behalf, and they really should have had a more complete picture of the mod system in place before pulling the trigger here. So maybe this is something that they should have saved for the final shape, in my opinion, when you would have had a much more complete mod system versus the more diluted bare bones kind of thing that we have going on right now. Next up, we're going to talk about the rework to the Triumphs Journey page. So they moved collections, triumphs, all that good stuff into one page, and they've also added in a new system called Guardian Ranks and Commendations to the game. And this is really something that I was interested about at first, but now that I've had time to play around with it, I don't really see myself engaging with this system or even using it in the long term, mainly because the whole point of a Guardian rank is to show a player's skill level in the game, and it is resetting each season. So what's even the point of engaging with it? A high-skilled player should, by all terms, have like a rank 9, 10, or even 11 at the start, and they too get kicked back to rank 6 at the start of a season and have to re-engage with all of the same objectives again. And again, this goes back to, in some regards, my feedback from Season of Plunder, where the objectives are ridiculous in some cases. Like, we're talking to get to rank 7, you need a commendation score of 750, when on average, if you're lucky and you get 2 people to commend you in a strike, you get about 20 to 30 points at most. So you do the math there and you can see how, we're already asking for a very large number of activities just to make one jump in Guardian rank. So not really a good thing in my opinion. And I think that the numbers need to be tuned down significantly. And I don't think that the Guardian rank should be resetting seasonally. If anything, the only time they should reset is at the start of a new expansion cycle. And even then, veteran players should already be bumped up to a higher point to begin with, because the tasks that you're asking them to do are things that these players have engaged with for a number of seasons leading up to that point already. The rework to the other sides of the pages, I can get behind that. Anytime you clean up the UI and make it easier to work with, I'm always a fan of that, and that was a nice quality of life change there. So nothing but good news on that end there, and I'm glad to see that quality of life things to make UI easier to work with over time is still kind of important to Bungie. All right, and then finally, I'm going to wrap up today with probably the longest part of the discussion here. I want to talk about the changes to the difficulty of the game, or the thing that Bungie waited to the very last minute to announce because they knew it was going to have the most controversy associated with it. This is something that, I'm not really happy that Bungie is doing. Like, they knew going into this that the changes to difficulty would be a very controversial point, and that instead of doing the right thing and being upfront with it right away, They waited to the very last minute to share it just to make sure that their engagement numbers were pretty high to begin with. That's kind of shady in my opinion, and I really wish they hadn't done that. So let's talk about why difficulty changes are not healthy for the game. So going into this, I've mentioned this in numerous videos now that I've done before. So all of the State of Destiny 2 videos that I've had generally have a low rating for in-game and the grind. And this is mainly down to 2 or 3 key points. The first one being Pinnacle RNG. This is something I've been hammering in all my videos for the past 3 years. So ever since Shadowkeep and Season of Dawn, I have been asking Bungie to introduce some kind of a system that would allow you to target your Pinnacle RNG drops, because having Pinnacles be nothing but RNG leads to very bad streaks where players take an extremely long time to hit the cap, and then they feel just burned out from this whole grind process, and it just puts a sour taste in the mouth. This has kind of been a point that has come to boot now, and people are unfortunately associating this sour taste of grinding to get a higher level into a problem with the level system in general, which is not a problem. The whole point of RPG or MMO style games is that over time you gear up, you get more powerful gear, you increase your level, and then that level allows you to tackle tougher challenges in the game. That's why we have, the GM entry point. That's why we have content in the game that requires a certain power level to engage with. Not only is power level an engagement of your damage output, but it is a measure of your engagement with the game through time. Because the more you play the game, the more drops you get. And the more drops you get, then you can get a higher level. And it's just a metric of showing that you've played the game long enough that you probably have an understanding of how the game works. Now, what's happening is in every piece of content that has Legend, Master, or above difficulty, your level is essentially deltaed, or you can only reach a certain point at which value your levels no longer count. And this is completely counterintuitive to the whole point of the power level experience. It makes it so power levels are completely irrelevant. And again, if you don't have a power level, then in my opinion, you don't have an RPG game, because there's nothing to showcase you getting stronger with time. Now, I'm not against having content that is challenging in the game, but there is a right way to do it, and there is a wrong way to do it. And having a delta on your power level, in my opinion, is the wrong way to do it. Because now you can't actually grow stronger with time. There's actually no point to engaging with the end game anymore, because you won't actually get anything to help you make the end game any easier with time. About the only thing that you can do is make a build, but if you don't have the skill to execute it, well, at this point, you're basically done. Like you can't engage with the end game anymore. And this is where a lot of the community sentiment has actually been situated, and where I agree with the main part of the community feedback. People who have in previous seasons had no problem engaging with Legend and Master tier content, only because of the fact that through time they could level up their gear pieces and their artifact and eventually overlevel or be on parity with the content, allowed them easier access into groups, because at that point they wouldn't be considered a hindrance to the team. Unfortunately, now you don't have that, because at a certain point you don't actually gain any more benefits. It is now only, can you actually put out the skill to engage with this content? And for a lot of people, unfortunately, the answer is no. The whole change to master raids, where you now have a minus 20 power delta at all times, is essentially the same as a permanent contest mode on the raid. So a permanent day one. And, I'm already against this whole notion of having deltas for a day one raid, and now you're just asking for it to be a permanent fixture. You already can see that such a small percentage of the population actually achieves a completion on day one, and now you're making this a permanent fixture of the master raid? I mean, come on, what are you trying to do? You're trying to shut out so many more players from the game? Like, this just baffles me. So that's one of the reasons why deltas just, they don't work. What you really should have focused on is a couple of other things. So fixing the whole issue with Pinnacle RNG. I've been saying this for so long, but making a deterministic path to actually hitting the maximum gear level is something that really should have been focused on for a while now. The other side of the coin is the seasonal reset, and I think what Bungie is doing this year with only having one gear grind should have been the other main fix this year. Like, this should have been the only thing that Bungie really tried to do this year in terms of a difficulty change, is just making only one pinnacle gear grind. So that way you go from 1800 to 1810 and you're good for the rest of the year. The only XP that you need to grind is your artifact level. That would have showcased the other side of the problem as being the exponential gains on requirements for artifact levels. And then Bungie could have tuned that down in a future season this year or made it part of the final shape expansion. So those 2 points would have gone hand in hand, and it would have shown that making the grind less significant, making the barrier to entry a little lower would have helped a lot, and it would have resolved a lot of this sour taste of having to grind every season, because at that point, there is no more gear grind. You just get your gear, and then you can focus in on doing what you actually want to do in the game, which is hunt for better stat rolls on your gear or hunt down certain weapon rolls, engage with the in-game content more frequently, and at the end of a season, you only dropped your artifact levels, which you can therefore quickly regain with an adjustment to the artifact leveling system. Finally, the other side of the issue is low tier content. And this is something I brought up a few times now. I mentioned it in yesterday's video, but things like Jolt just break the game completely. Like, they're just so busted. And I don't understand why they thought that would be a healthy thing to have in low tier content. It just emphasized racing through strikes, competing for kills in PvE. Like, none of this is good. So I think in the short term, having the deltas on your basic Vanguard ops and, maybe hero content, that's fine in my opinion. But when we're talking about the end game, where you already are required to have a very well-versed knowledge of the game, putting additional level deltas on it is not a good thing to do. And it's something that I want to see gone. So what I would like to see Bungie do is you can retain the +0 delta on Vanguard ops. I would maybe consider moving hero to +0 as well, just to be consistent. Then get rid of the deltas everywhere else. So no deltas on patrol, no deltas on any of the legend or master content. The only thing that should have a delta in this game is Grandmaster, and that is because it was specifically designed to have a delta. But everything else, leave it alone. There was no problem with the difficulty last year. I don't care what people like Salt Grepo are saying about the game being too easy. It is perfectly fine for the game to have content that is easy, and it is perfectly fine for the end game to also have content that is easy. Enough catering to these ultra hardcore people, Bungie. Focus on the bigger picture. Focus on the majority. So, all in all, those are my final thoughts for the Lightfall release. Given my numerous points of concern, if I had to issue any kind of a rating based on my usual scheme, I would probably put this release at a 6 out of 10. This one is probably the lowest of the 3 in my opinion of the Age of Darkness saga. So I'd say for all of the DLCs so far, it would be below Beyond Light, Witch Queen, and Forsaken. But I would say that Lightfall does score better than Shadowkeep because, the destination is better, the campaign was longer, and at least there was something going to it. Lightfall had such a huge surge of momentum ahead of the release, with a lot of great quality of life adjustments behind it, and such a good first look at the story and the subclass, but unfortunately, all these were slapped down in the end by difficulty adjustments, dilution of the mod system, and lackluster and at sometimes annoying story and character elements. This Bungie, you got to do a lot better for the final shape, especially given the loss of goodwill that you've had with the whole Witch Queen release. You also need to revert this year's difficulty system changes. I mean, that, in my opinion, that is another one of those sunsetting double primary level failures that this game has. Maybe Destiny burnout in general is starting to set in, but I really had much higher expectations for this release than what was delivered, and I'm just disappointed that Bungie went down the path that they did for some of these things, and it really shut down so much of what made this game fun in the past year, and I just don't see how we got from Witch Queen to this. And no, Bungie, again, putting the rest of the story into seasonal releases is not good. I already mentioned that people who don't buy the seasons this year or who start the game next year, they're going to miss out on the key things that you want to do. So unfortunately, we're right back to where we were before. Bungie, you've got a lot of work to do, and I really hope you at least have some of these changes in mind already, because people are hurting here. And if you keep it up where it is right now, you're going to start losing players. And unfortunately, this is the kind of thing where, once people stop playing, they might not come back at all. So that's going to do it for me for today. Again, criticism as usual. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion. So, I mean, if you're one of the people who like difficulty, that's fine with you. But, in terms of many other people, it's not fine with them. And, at least I really hope you consider to respect their opinions as well, versus saying your usual batch of get good, because fortunately for you, a lot of us are better than you even. So for you to say that is just insulting to many other people and very unrespectful for the community. That'll do it for today's video. Thanks for watching, and I will hopefully get back up to a more regular schedule of content drops in the coming months once my schedule kind of calms down a bit. At least for Destiny content right now, I'm planning on the next thing to be the update for State of Destiny 2, which will probably be in June. Otherwise, probably a little light on content for the rest of the spring while I wrap up some of my work that's going on right now. So thanks for watching right now, and I'll catch everyone next time.